Good morning, everyone, and welcome to RDA's four-part webinar series centered around SharePoint 2013. Today's topic is migrating to SharePoint 2013. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Pablo Gazmiri. Pablo is a principal architect here at RDA, and he's led numerous SharePoint efforts for a number of Fortune 500 companies. His SharePoint expertise includes system, architecture, governance, custom solutions, planning, mentoring, and training. He has over 15 years of development experience. He's a web, collaboration, and search expert. He's built numerous corporate intranets, extranets, e-commerce sites, and custom applications over the course of his career. He's recently assisted clients with build-outs of SharePoint 2013 portals and collaboration environments, and he also leads RDA's SharePoint 2013 migration offerings. Pablo, we thank you for joining us today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Rochelle, for that great introduction. Again, thank you to everyone who's dialed in. This webinar is going to be very heavy with information. I don't have any demos. I'm going to do my best not to just read the slides to you, but unfortunately, there's not a lot to show here. There's just a lot of information to talk about. So bear with me as we go through here. Before we get started, I'd like to run a quick poll just to see where you all are in the SharePoint migration planning process. So for those of you who are in the process or will be starting later this year, go ahead and note that. Certainly if you don't have plans this year, you can note that as well. And I doubt many of you have already completed the upgrade. Okay, it looks like a lot of you are either in the process or will be starting the process this year, and that's great. At this point, if you wait much longer, you might end up going directly to SharePoint 2015. Okay, so there should be a lot of useful information for those of you who are planning or are about to perform a migration. We're going to talk about a lot of different topics today related to standing up in migrations. So just to quickly take care of one last housekeeping item, there will be a post-event email. We'll link to a survey as well as these presentation slides. Like I said, there's a lot of information in these slides, so they'll be a great resource for you afterwards. If you do complete the survey, we'll be entering you in our drawing for an Apple Watch, which we are very confident will actually come out this year. And if it doesn't, we'll find something similar to give out as a gift. But we're hoping to be able to give away an Apple Watch to one of you who completes the survey. Otherwise, thanks a lot for replying to this email and giving us information in the survey. We appreciate it. So today, I'm going to start with a high-level overview about some of the broad requirements when doing a SharePoint migration. I'm going to talk a little bit about the big picture when it comes to standing up and migrating to SharePoint 2013 and sort of all the different aspects that you need to be looking at. It's not just a technology problem, it's also an organizational challenge. We'll talk about that. I'll also go through some of your options for migration, what approaches you might take and what strategies you might take to get from a 2010 environment to a 2013 environment. Talk a little bit about some common pitfalls, the things you don't want to do. And then we'll have a discussion of how RDA likes to engage when it comes to migration projects. And even if you don't choose to engage with RDA to assist with your migration, I think there's a lot of insights in how we do things that might help you on your own. So let's get started. From a high level, there's no longer an in-place upgrade option. For those of you who were considering that, it was probably never really a great idea anyway for a number of reasons. But it's not even an option anymore. So this means that all upgrades are now stand-ups and migrations. So you will have to stand up a new farm and migrate content to it, which does give you the advantage of maintaining the old farm for some period of time as an archive, as well as certainly being able to roll back in case something goes wrong. Visual upgrade is still an option, so you can maintain the 2010 look and feel in 2013 for some period of time. For those of you who may not have ever upgraded visually from 2007, you're going to have to do that before you move to 2013, and perhaps even go straight to the 2013 UI. I generally recommend sort of ripping off that Band-Aid and getting your users used to the new UI and getting any support issues out of the way there, so so that your end users can be more productive with the platform from day one. You might want to consider moving to the cloud at this point if you haven't already, whether it's SharePoint Online or infrastructure as a service in Azure or Amazon Web Services. Otherwise, you're most likely going to stand up some new VMs. We'll talk about that. Also, migrations are a great opportunity to clean up your SharePoint environment. We see a lot of sprawl in SharePoint environments, a lot of content that becomes stale or unused, and certainly when you start to migrate, it's a great time to evaluate that, or at least put in some processes to begin to evaluate that in the future. Different functionality is going to require different approaches. Really what we're talking about is SharePoint's not just an application, it's a platform that can deliver a number of services. So depending on whether you're using an internet site or a portal site or just collaboration space, you're going to take a different approach. And finally, you got to carefully consider how you use new 2013 features, and we'll talk about each of these items in more depth as we go through today. So I'm going to start with the big picture. This is what I call the big picture slide for SharePoint. This is sort of how we look at all the aspects in an organization that we'd like to help companies with when it comes to standing up SharePoint. So there's a lot of layers to this, and really this would apply to any enterprise application, not necessarily just SharePoint, but we apply it to SharePoint when we do our upgrades. So we typically plan from the bottom up. We start with figuring out what the appropriate physical infrastructure is for the services you want to deploy. Then we dive into functional layers in terms of what services are we making available, how are we making them available. Then we get into the data portion, which is really talking about, how do we organize our sites and our data and our documents, and who owns that data and how is it secured. And then finally, the most important piece to ROI is really how people use the system. And so we really encourage you to spend some time thinking about how you're going to get people to adopt the system, how you're going to train them, how you're going to communicate them. And then at the same time, from an IT perspective, do you have the people in place to maintain and support the system, and do they understand their roles and responsibilities in that space? So overall, you want to, when you're performing a migration, you want to start obviously by evaluating all of your existing content and usage. So, what are you offering up in your SharePoint farm? How is it being used? And by how many people? What's the size of data, et cetera? When RDA performs migrations, we run some automated scripts that help us understand how your farm is being used and what features are in place. Next thing is you want to understand what's available in 2013 and figure out, what are we trying to get out of a migration? What new features are we going to try to take advantage of? Where's the value? If you can't find value in upgrading to 2013, I'd encourage you to take a look at the first webinar of this series, which was the new features in 2013 and what's available for user productivity, because there really are some great options. You want to plan your migration approach and those big picture items that I was just talking about. So your infrastructure, your services, your data, and your people. You really want to have, at least at a broad level, a good understanding of what those are going to look like. And then start to stand up new infrastructure, whether it's in the cloud or on-premise. Convert any existing custom code that you might have, or if you have third-party products, you'll need to get the 2013 version of those products ready. Sometimes that might come with new licenses, so you'll have to potentially negotiate new licenses or just get new license keys. Then you get into actually performing some test migrations and resolving the issues that come out of there. It's not a simple flip of a switch to move your data from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013. There are certainly easier ways and more complex ways to do it, but either way, you are going to find some issues that need to be resolved. Ideally, you can resolve those through PowerShell script or some automated fashion so that you can repeat the process until you have a migration process that is, very close to 100%, so you can be sure at go live that your data and your content functionality will migrate properly. Typically, we then get into a cycle of communication, training, migration, and then support. So obviously, we want to communicate ahead of time. We want to train ahead of time. When we actually migrate people's sites, or if we, certainly in terms of collaboration sites and portal sites, we're then going to have a lot of support post-migration to make sure that people have the help they need when they see this new UI pop up. Ideally, you've already communicated that would happen and they've been trained on it, but typically there'll be some items that may not work as expected, and it's certainly very difficult on a very large portal or collaboration space to test absolutely every little detail. And so typically there will be some bugs to work out post-deployment that you'll need to support. On conclusion, you'll want to generally set your old content to read-only so it can function as an archive for some period of time, at which point, after that period of time, you could decommission or repurpose that old farm. Maybe if you decommission it, you can reclaim some of those VM resources, or maybe you could repurpose it as, for example, a disaster recovery farm for your 2013 environment. So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. Most organizations at this point are entirely on virtual machines for SharePoint, including SQL, which offers a number of benefits, and certainly that's what I encourage people to do. If you do decide to go with physical servers, you're not basically with the mainstream at this point, and you're losing out on a lot of advantage in terms of snapshots and backups, the ability to use tools such as vMotion to provide high availability, etc. With the cloud, you have two main options. You can go to SharePoint Online in Office 365, or use an infrastructure as a service solution like from Azure, Amazon Web Services, or Rackspace. There are a number of network topologies that are available or that are supported by SharePoint. So depending on whether you're going to make your site publicly available or whether you're using perhaps a public internet site with anonymous access, you're going to need to plan your network topologies. Some service topologies really refers to things like your search service, BDC, profile, how those services are laid out and connected to web applications. You want to plan all of that, as well as data storage, high availability, and benchmarking and load testing. And one thing I want to mention here is when it comes to benchmarking and load testing, benchmarking refers to getting a baseline of your hardware performance. So you'd run a benchmark on your VM just to determine how fast is the CPU, is it as fast as we expect it to be, how fast is the disk in terms of latency and throughput, whereas load testing is really looking at the application as a whole. So once you stand up SharePoint, you're actually going to want to load test it to make sure that it can handle the number of user requests that you expect in your system. And you can certainly get a baseline of how many user requests you need to support by looking at analytics on your existing farm. Definitely a good idea to do both benchmarking and load testing so you know if there's an issue with your infrastructure or perhaps with the way that you set up SharePoint if or when you have issues with performance. So when it comes to migration approaches, we typically talk about two high-level approaches. You either do a big bang migration where you move all content at once, or a phased migration where perhaps you move one department or one site at a time. Now, one of the great advantages of a big bang migration is that at least at the web application level, you can maintain the same URLs. If you try to move one site collection at a time within a web application, you're going to need to transition your users from an old URL to a new URL and potentially break a lot of links along the way, which is going to be very costly to clean up. So certainly this is one reason why you typically want to break your SharePoint environment up into multiple web applications so that you can move one web application at a time and maintain those URLs, but that's not always an option. You also have issues with, the actual data transfer. If you have 200 gigabytes of content or maybe 2 terabytes of content and you're moving to a different data center, you might not be able to move that 2 terabytes overnight. In fact, you almost always will not be able to move 2 terabytes overnight. So you'll have to take a different approach. The phased approach certainly has some advantages in terms of when you roll things out, you're only going to be supporting the users who have just been rolled out at that time. So, if you move one department at a time, you can phase each department, train each department separately, and support each department separately on rollout, and not have nearly as big of a support load at rollout as if you were to do a big bang migration. Then we talk a little bit about, do we do a lift and shift? Do we migrate everything as is? Or do we do some kind of transformation? Do we alter presentation? Do we clean up security? Do we rework the content? Obviously, lift and shift is going to be a little more straightforward with less planning. But oftentimes a transformative approach is a little bit more effective in terms of making sure the users get the most out of the new platform. So usually we will help you figure out what combination to use, and it's different depending on a lot of different factors, from the size of your data, the way that your web applications and site collections are structured, what you're actually using, whether it's a portal or collaboration sites. So collaboration sites are certainly more conducive to a phased transformation where we move one site at a time, whereas something like a publishing portal or a public-facing intranet site, you pretty much have to do a big bang lift and shift. Just get it moved over, and if you're going to do some transformation, make it a second release. And don't try to do too much at once, because oftentimes with IT projects, when we bite off more than we can chew, when we try to boil the ocean, that's where we get into trouble and we have failed projects. So if you do decide to have a transformative process, you typically want to evaluate each site's content and functionality. So I refer to the MRD strategy, which is really where we take any particular site, document library, or even down to the document level, and we try to figure out, are we going to migrate this, are we going to rebuild this, or are we going to discard this? And content owners really need to be in charge of the classification of content to be migrated or discarded, whereas IT really needs to be the one to decide whether functionality should be rebuilt, because our end users are not likely to have the technical background to understand why a workflow might not be appropriate in 2013, or why you might want to switch to an out-of-the-box workflow, or move a SharePoint list into an Excel file because you have way too many items in the list, whatever it might be. And as I mentioned before, your existing farm definitely will provide a read-only archive of the discarded content. If you choose not to move stuff, you can keep that available. And typically what we'll do is provide a staging URL for a new site in 2013 while we maintain the original URL of your existing SharePoint farm. And then at some point, when we actually do like a full migration of a web application, we will take that staging host name and convert it to our SharePoint portal name, whatever that's called, and then take the old portal and rename it with something like, old SharePoint or SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint Legacy, so that users actually can still get to both environments, but the old environment will be read-only, so they can't really do anything there, but they can get to old content if there was something perhaps they forgot to move into the new system.
Hey, Pablo.
Yep.
It's Rochelle. We have a question.
Okay.
Okay. Can the entire farm be migrated to 2013, but site collections left in 14, and then have one site collection at a time migrated to the 15 hive?
So yes, you can leave site collections in 2010 mode in 2013, and then go one site collection at a time into the 2013 UI. But there may be additional issues with that in terms of, although certainly at the site collection level you can access resources from either hive, things like your search service are going to be fully upgraded. And the way that maybe BCS works or managed metadata, some of these centralized services cannot be incrementally migrated. So that's definitely true, and that can definitely help reduce your support load, but there are some limitations there.
Okay, thanks.
So from a data migration perspective, there's really two main ways to move your data over. The first is a database attach upgrade. This is where you would take a single content database, detach it from your old farm, and then reattach it to your new farm, or really just back it up from your old farm and then reattach a restored copy to your new farm. When you reattach that database, SharePoint will recognize, hey, this is an older version of SharePoint database. This is a 2010 database. I'm going to upgrade it to 2013. Depending on the size of that database, that reattach process could take, a short amount of time or a very long amount of time. The advantage to this is it's very low cost. You don't need to buy any additional tools, and it's very high fidelity because this is SharePoint's native way of migrating content. So for the most part, all of your workflows and even in-process workflows should come over cleanly. All of your document and document metadata, user references, even to users that are no longer in Active Directory, will come over cleanly. The con to this approach really is if you have customizations that maybe you're not moving forward into 2013, you're going to have a hard time reattaching that content database because SharePoint's going to see that those features are enabled, but they're not available in the new farm. So you need to be careful about some of those orphaned items. For those of you who maybe have a single large content database, you might need to split the site collections up in that database across more databases so that you can back up and restore your content databases in a reasonable amount of time to perform these migrations. It's also all or nothing, so you can't really do a lot of in-flight alterations or partial migrations. If you do want to take a transformative approach with a database attached upgrade, you're going to need to write some scripts to do that after the database is attached. And then finally, you can't skip versions of SharePoint with this method. So if you do have a 2007 farm and you want to do a database attach upgrade, you'll have to stand up an interim 2010 farm just to upgrade the content to 2010 and then to 2013. And that definitely will take some testing and validation to make sure that along the way you don't miss out on anything. The other main option here for data migration is to use a commercial off-the-shelf migration tool. We are a Metalogix partner at RDA. We've been using the Metalogix tool called Content Matrix to assist our clients who want to take a more incremental approach or want to migrate to SharePoint Online. We use this tool. So the nice thing about this tool is it will connect to both your old SharePoint farm and your new SharePoint farm and move the data between them. And it's fairly high fidelity. And the nice thing about this is you can do things like you can move to SharePoint Online. With a database attach upgrade, you can't just ship a database to Microsoft and have it come online in SharePoint Online. So you really would need to use a migration tool for that. It decouples content from dependencies. So really, it's just taking your documents and your list items and moving them over. It also supports full and incremental migrations. So if you do have perhaps 2 terabytes of content, you can migrate that 2 terabytes over the course of many days or weeks and then perform an incremental migration of the content at go live. So only the items that have changed since the full migration, or since the content that was already moved over was moved over, only the changes would go over there. So you'd have basically a way to get your 2 terabytes into a big bang migration. You also can transform content in flight, so you can map users and groups and folders and have a lot of options in terms of how you rework some of your content. So if you have a lot of security groups that need to be reworked, if you need to split up site collections, maybe your farm has a single large site collection and you want to split it into some smaller site collections for better management, this tool is great to do that. There's a lot of difficulties in doing that, and it's not easy, but it's the only way to do it. You can't do that with a database attach upgrade. And it does allow you to pick and choose what will be migrated. And it also can skip versions of SharePoint. So if you have any of these limitations, the Content Matrix tool from Metalogix is a great option. There are plenty of other competitor tools on the market. We tend to think that Content Matrix is the best of breed. But with all of these tools, there are some issues. There are some workarounds needed to migrate certain content. I would say anywhere between 75 to 90% of the content will migrate cleanly, and that other 10 to 25% will need some kind of tweaking, fixing, or rework. And a lot of that comes down to things like links inside of InfoPath or workflow definitions. Yeah, even within documents themselves. It's not going to republish your InfoPath forms to 2013 format. And certainly, if you have different templates, for example, in your source site and your destination site, you might lose some web parts along the way because the tool doesn't know quite how to map those across. Now, Metalogix is constantly improving this tool, so things are getting better every day. But at this point, you can't expect it to be just a set it and forget it type of migration. You do have to be very active. And the tool itself has a lot of options, and so it helps to have a lot of expertise there.
Pablo, we have another question.
Okay.
It's really a two-part question, I guess. Does Metalogix offer a flat rate or a per data migration?
Yeah, so Metalogix for their enterprise version, which I think is about $3,500, it supports unlimited. Yeah, they do offer smaller fees for limited amounts of content. So if you've only got, and I believe there's a certain number of, I'm not sure how many gigabytes it is, that are actually free. And then at some point you can pay for, I'm not sure if it's 100 or 500 gigabytes, and then beyond that you pay for enterprise, and then it's unlimited. But frankly, the value for $3,500, it's an incredible value compared to having your own scripts developed, or even dragging and dropping, documents from one version to another. So I think that the value is fantastic with Metalogix. I'm not actually that familiar with the ShareGate tool. I know that RDA evaluated it at one point, and we decided to go with the Metalogics tool, but from what I understand, it's also a decent tool, and it's fairly full fidelity as well. And all of these tools will perform migrations from 2007 to 2013. 2007 is recent enough, and I know that the Metalogics tool will actually go as far back as, I think, 2003. Now, on the people side, communication and training are key to adoption and therefore key to return on investment. So it's really important not to skimp on this side. In addition to your end users, you also want to make sure that the administrators and server infrastructure people who are going to be help desk, and even your SharePoint team understand both their roles and responsibilities, as well as get trained up on anything required for the new platform. You also want to make sure that things like server monitoring are configured and set up. And finally, really governance. Everyone understands how important governance is, but no one ever seems to have the time for it until it's too late. So certainly when you're performing a migration, it's a great time to rework your governance or create some governance if you haven't already. So let's talk about some common pitfalls. As with most failed software projects, again, come down to trying to do too much at once, trying to boil the ocean, and not taking a more incremental approach if possible. So as much as possible, don't try to change everything at once. Try to be incremental. But like I said, we have some limitations when it comes to things like host names. We really want to try to keep our URLs the same. Make sure that you evaluate your content and functionality. Don't just try to blindly migrate stuff. You will find things like very large lists in SharePoint, for example, that perhaps in 2007 work okay. Maybe they're not fast, but I can pull up a view of 10,000 items. Whereas in SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013, we have query throttling enabled typically, and that will prevent list views of more than 5,000 items from even appearing at all. Now you can disable that, but there is a performance impact, and generally you want to evaluate those items and make sure that maybe you find a better system to store such large data sets. Redirecting old URLs and fixing links in migrated content is a really important thing to do. You will find people have favorites, people have links within documents, links within InfoPath and workflows and other specialized items. You really want to make sure that you take care of that. If you do change your URL structure, you'll want to have something in place so that when people visit the old site, they are redirected to the new site, or at least given the option. Certainly, if you're trying to maintain the old site as an archive, you might want to set up just a different URL for archive purposes to access that, while still redirecting the new stuff, the existing URLs. There are third-party products that will actually scan your documents for links and help you change them and fix broken links. If any of you are curious about that, send me an email and I can connect you with those companies. You definitely, as I mentioned before, want to validate your hardware and software configuration through some kind of a baseline, a baseline metric on your servers, and especially when it comes to disk and network. Those are very important. And then, of course, your software configuration can be verified from a performance perspective through load tests. So with Visual Studio these days, it's very quick to create some basic load tests, run them under a number of users, and you'll see right away whether or not your infrastructure is performing and your application is performing. As I mentioned before, don't skimp on communication and training, and don't expect that these migration tools that I mentioned are going to be 100%. They do require some expertise. Give yourself some time to play with those tools. If you're budgeting for this, you might want to give yourself a week or two to really get to know those tools before you get into actual trial migrations. One of the things I should mention about the Metalogics tools and others is that they have a very difficult time maintaining in-process workflows. So if you make use of a lot of workflows, you might have to coordinate with your end users to complete those workflows in the old environment or restart them in the new environment when you migrate. And that, I will say, workflows are probably your biggest pain point. So when it comes to migration, if you're using a lot of them. So take very good care to understand where your workflows are running and what they look like. Although RDA provides some scripts on our engagements to find what workflows are in use, there is a free tool from Metalogix called Migration Expert that you can download and run against your farm that will tell you a lot about what workflows are running so you can understand what potential risks you have when you migrate those. So how does RDA help clients perform these migrations? We have a standardized process that takes our clients through planning, building, migrating, rolling out, and supporting a new version of SharePoint. So you can see here in this graphic we have sort of a process flow at the top, and our migration step is very incremental and cyclical. So we always migrate some content, verify that it moved over, test the functionality, and then typically have to revise and perhaps tweak some functionality or write a PowerShell script to clean some stuff up when it gets into 2013 because it's different and not everything comes over cleanly, even with a database attach upgrade. So we typically take a very cyclical and incremental approach, and we will get a migration and test a migration multiple times until we get it right, or at least close enough within a reasonable budget so that you can then roll out and support that. While we are taking those steps, we're also taking some ongoing activities in terms of communication, training, governance, operations, and support to make sure that your organization is ready to support the system and your users are ready to make the best use of the system. We believe we have some great value adds in terms of we come to you with a project plan, with standard governance plans, standard communication and training plans. We have some hard-won checklists that we've built over the years as we've discovered problems that pop up for various clients. We certainly go back and note those in our checklist so that we know to check for specific issues ahead of time. So you really get to take advantage of our expertise and, frankly, some of the pain that we've had in the past to make sure that you don't go through that. And that's really one of the best reasons I can give you to engage with a partner like RDA to get this done, because we do these migrations on a regular basis, and it's something we have a lot of expertise with. I promise that you will have a lot more pain if you try to go it alone, because it's not something that your typical IT staff has a lot of experience with. And finally, we have a number of scripts that we bring to bear in terms of inventorying your existing farm, performing a baseline of your infrastructure, and then we actually perform a fully scripted installation. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So when it comes to planning, we have a custom questionnaire that starts the process and gives us the basic information we need to start planning meetings and dig in more to planning details. We typically assign a full-time architect during a planning phase to spec out the new farm, inventory existing assets, work with you to establish governance, tailor a migration plan, and then really collect all the details that we need to get the install ready. And we have a pre-install checklist that I think is about 3 or 4 pages long now that covers everything from what the server names are, what the service accounts are, what the email servers are, do you have incoming email addresses configured, all the different details that we need to have to get going. So we collect all of that in the planning phase. And the architect will actually configure a standard installation script for your environment so that he can then hand it off to someone who isn't quite as experienced as an architect with the full stack of SharePoint, but has done a lot of migrations and is typically a lower cost resource. So typically we plan anywhere between 3 days to 2 weeks for your typical organization. Some organizations who have made extensive use of SharePoint have a number of web applications. Perhaps they've got public-facing sites. Perhaps they're under regulatory regimes. Those planning engagements tend to be a lot longer because of the high complexity, sometimes as long as 8 weeks and maybe even longer than that. But that's not typical.
Pablo?
Yep.
We do have another question.
I see it. Do we provide branding resources? So yes, we do, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we actually have a standard SharePoint solution that implements branding that we can tailor for your organization in terms of applying your organization's colors and logos, and then making sure that branding is automatically applied to all new sites in your environment. So we definitely can help you with branding, and that's something that we would start with in the planning stage to figure out if you need, and then we would build that into the installation itself. So when we actually do go to build it, the architect doesn't sit there and run the SharePoint installs and twiddle his thumbs. We have an installation technician who will perform some tests on your infrastructure. They'll use our benchmarks to make sure that your infrastructure is performing. They'll go through a pre-install checklist to make sure that everything is set up properly. Everything from, do the servers match the specs that our architect defined up front, to are the drives formatted properly. So for example, when you're configuring SQL data drives, you want to make sure you keep your logs and your data separate. You want to make sure your temp DB is on a different drive as well. You want to format all those drives with 64K block allocation and NTFS. Doing so will give you up to a 30% performance increase. Then we check for all of that. Those of you might want to check on your existing farms and see what your SQL data drives are allocated for. If they're allocated for 4K blocks, you're actually missing out on a lot of performance. So we will benchmark your infrastructure. This technician will then run that fully scripted installation that was configured by an architect, and then go ahead and install and configure any of the custom solutions, including the branding solution. And we'll talk about what other solutions we have as well. And then they might perform some additional configuration tasks under the guidance of our architect. We'll then bring the architect in to verify the installation. Maybe you have some existing custom solutions that need to be upgraded. The architect will do that. And then we'll be available for advanced support and any planning and migration activities that might be required. So the idea here is we don't want to have a really expensive architect doing things that one of our installation techs can do for about half the cost per hour. So this really saves you some money, and it frees up the architect to help you with higher level strategic decisions and planning and rollout activities. When we actually get to migration, again, we have a migration technician. Usually it's the same person who installed your farm who begins to migrate the content and verify that content using our verification checklist. And then they'll also go ahead and not just verify that it's there, but actually try it out and make sure that the functionality is there. So we really try to ensure that everything is working properly in the new environment. Any issues that the migration technician comes up with will be passed off to the architect, who will then be there for some more advanced support, and may continue to be billing either part-time or full-time to assist with planning and rollout activities. Those of you who have constrained budgets, we will work with you if you want to perform some of the verification and QA. A lot of times we have clients that would prefer to do that part themselves and save a little bit of money. That's no problem. We'll work with you. When it comes to rolling out and supporting the system, we have a go live checklist that really lists out all the, again, 2 or 3 pages of items to make sure that we have either planned for or the details for or the people in line for, as well as a communication plan, which involves not just your end users, but also any IT stakeholders who, might be required to update your DNS or your email or your external proxy configuration, whatever it is where we have to involve other people. We're going to make sure that we communicate with them and that they're involved. We'll also have our migration technician perform, of course, a final migration and then provide some support for a predetermined period. We know that we can never just upgrade you to 2013, migrate all your content, and walk away. There's always some additional issues that pop up later just because it's a very complex undertaking, and there's a lot of things that are different about every client's environment. So we always include some post-go-live support. We will also create an introductory training video using your portal. Usually it's pretty quick, just a minute or two of, hey, here's your new portal. Here's how you get to some things. Here's how the new search works, things like that. And then we also bring some proven strategies to boost adoption and ROI. Now, let me go back a little bit. I had a slide in here about our custom solutions. I think it got lost in the mix. So we do bring custom solutions that can be customized for your business that provide 4 different areas. We have branding, as I mentioned, navigation. So if you want to implement a global nav across many site collections, we have a quick and easy way to do that. Doesn't cost you anything extra. It takes a little bit of time for the migration technician to configure for you, but at that point you will have complete control over a global nav that is applied either to a web application or to your entire farm. We also have a lockdown solution that will enable you to turn off certain features. If you want to hide the link to the OneDrive, disable My Sites entirely. If you want to hide the SharePoint store, the App Store, we can do that. The lockdown solution really helps provide basically additional knobs and levers on your SharePoint farm so that you can control at a little more finer granularity what people have access to. And then finally, we have a site provisioning solution. For those of you who want to make self-service site creation available, but perhaps want to specify very specific types of sites with certain features that get enabled, we even have a way to configure a PowerShell script to run against these sites when they're created, as well as have basically approvals on what sites are created and for who. We can also control who is allowed to request different types of sites. So a fairly full-featured solution that will help you govern your sites, really keep track of what was created, who created the site, why they created the site, and help you dispose of the site once it's done or archive the site once it's done. So it's really, really great to have a site provisioning process in place for governance purposes. And we provide that, again, for free as part of our installation. So a little bit about RDA. We're different from other consulting firms in that we don't just focus on IT. We really focus on business problems and bring IT solutions to bear. We provide complete consulting, planning, and development service for all our clients. And we focus on generally .NET, although we are getting into other areas. If you do need help with Python or PHP, we're willing to jump in there and help out. We do a lot of SharePoint work and a lot of business intelligence work, and as the cloud grows, that portion of our business is growing as well. We are located all along the East Coast, although we have done work for clients as far away as Alaska or Bermuda. We do have a technology center in Atlanta, Baltimore, Charlotte, Philly, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia, along with our development center in Baltimore, which has some lower cost resources that we can make available at a blended rate. For those of you who have restrictions on rates, they tend to work with very high skilled resources to provide a lot of value at a slightly lower cost. We've got a lot of expertise and a lot of experience. We've served 1,000+ clients. Most of our business is repeat business, and that's a testament to the way that we work with our clients. We really engage with them and take their problems on as our own, and we really try to focus on delivering high value and low risk solutions. We do have specialized teams within our group for architectural guidance, which is really custom application development, as well as cloud, business intelligence, whether it's classic business intelligence using SQL Server reporting services, or SharePoint BI and Power BI on SharePoint Online. Collaboration workflows are collaboration on SharePoint group. Typically, it's all done. All of our SharePoint work is done through the collaboration group. And then we do focus on application development on the mobile space as well for all platforms. So we do have a lot of experienced staff. We write books. We speak on conferences. It looks like we're getting pretty close to time. So are there any questions?
Again, if anybody does have a question, you can dial *6, and that will unmute your line, or you can use the Q&A interface at the top of your screen. We do have one question, Pablo, that came in, and it's, what does it take to upgrade custom solutions for the next version of SharePoint?
That's a great question. So in some cases, you can take a 2010 WSP solution and actually upload it or load it right into your SharePoint 2013 environment, and it will continue to function. So, for example, things like web parts, for the most part, should continue to function. What you'll find is those web parts might output some HTML or some CSS that doesn't quite look right in the new 2013 UI, so you might have some visual changes to make there. If you do have a solution with something like a timer job, that timer job will not function in SharePoint 2013. So it really depends on the solution. And for the most part, it's a fairly quick thing, maybe an hour or two to migrate most solutions if you know what you're doing. And like I said, some solutions will actually work as is in the new environment. Any other questions? If you'd like to ask a question directly on the phone, just press *6 to unmute. Introduce yourself and ask a question. No takers. Okay, I guess we're done.
I guess we're done. Yep. Thanks, Pablo, and thanks everyone for joining us today. This was our third webinar in the series. Our final webinar is scheduled for next Thursday, July 31st at 11 a.m., and it will be around securing SharePoint 2013. If you would like more information or if you do have additional questions, you can certainly visit our website at www.rdacorp.com. You can also reach out to Pablo, or you can reach out to the marketing group as well. I think I'll just, yep, there you go.
There we go.
So again, thanks for attending. That concludes our session for today. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to having you join us next time.